out of Venezuela, where an attempted coup is underway there. You heard that right. Opposition leader Juan Guaido calling for the military to oust the sitting president, Nicolas Maduro. In an early morning video, Guaido saying, quote, "The moment is now," calling for his supporters to take to the streets, and many answering that call. Crowds gathered around an Air Force base in Caracas, the capital, and both Maduro and Guaido are claiming that they have the support of Venezuela's military. That'll be the key question. Who is right? Joining me now is CNN senior international correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh. He's been on the ground there in Venezuela many times. What is the latest, and how serious a threat is this to the sitting government of Nicolas Maduro?
Jim, and we've talked about this continuing protest movement inside Venezuela, but today is something very new. We're talking about Juan Guaido, who has declared himself the interim president, has been recognized by dozens of countries, including the US and the European Union, for the first time as dawn broke, saying he was in a military base, standing up, flanked by what looked like to be a Venezuelan National Guard, Venezuelan army, with riot police vehicles behind them, and importantly, an opposition leader who's supposed to be under house arrest, Leopoldo Lopez, to one of his sides, standing there and saying this is the beginning of the end. This is what we call Operation Freedom, and calling on people to stand up and get rid of the usurper. That's what he refers to Nicolas Maduro, the president whose presidency he considers to be illegitimate. That is a staggering moment of theatre, something Juan Guaido is very good at, frankly, but hasn't always managed to translate it into something real on the street. Are what we're seeing now the first signs of possibly the military turning? What's startling you're seeing there in those images are the blue armbands that appear to be being worn by Venezuelan soldiers who are sympathetic with the opposition. That's what we seem to be seeing. And the fact that the tear gas that regularly flies at these opposition demos, they often last hours, people throw rocks, they go home. This tear gas is being used on Venezuelan soldiers themselves. See that there? That is very different. I should point out too, we've heard from Reuters and our reporter on the ground, Stefano Pozzebon, saying that they've heard what seems like gunshots in the past half hour or so. Now, I should bear in mind that could mean a lot of things. It could be blanks, it could be rounds fired in the air, it could be somebody nothing to do with either military taking matters into their own hands. But it shows a certain sharpening of the situation, which we haven't really seen before. Live ammo is not something I've seen used much. Rubber bullets have been fired in the past. So the big question now is, what does the Venezuelan government do? What's interesting to see is their reaction. You have there on the screen the phrase attempted coup. That's certainly what they are calling it. And while they've used a lot of inflammatory rhetoric in the past years or so against their opposition, on a day like today, to say this is a coup, well, that simply just pours gasoline onto the opposition's own fire, potentially gathering momentum for them. And interestingly enough, too, the people around Nicolas Maduro, they're calling his protesters out onto the street. That's not abnormal, but it is abnormal for them to say, can you please come around the presidential palace, Miraflores? Now, why is all this happening today? Well, tomorrow was supposed to be a nationwide day of protest called by the Venezuelan opposition, May the 1st, dozens potentially of places around the country to get people out on the streets. Many thought the movement was really flagging. You know, it had been months. They'd had a lot of external support, but really Juan Guaido hadn't translated that. Great as he is on social media at fanning the flames of protest, he hadn't translated that into real practical action. Is what we're seeing on the streets today a change? We'll know in the hours ahead, but I have to say, I didn't expect to see this, Jim.
Nick, help us understand what we're seeing on the screens here. So you're saying, and you note what is important here is some of those soldiers wearing armbands that appear to show that they do, as Guaido is claiming, support him, support the opposition. Now, the tear gas you're saying here, is that being fired on soldiers by other soldiers? Does this indicate a split in the military now?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing there is some of that. Now, I can't tell precisely because of the camera angle, but that looks to be around the main airport where we often see standoffs between demonstrators and the military. The military inside often fire out tear gas to keep people away. You get kids sometimes chasing at the fences, throwing rocks, throwing Molotov cocktails, doing what they can. A lot of poverty and frustration at the heart of some of these protests too. What we seem to be seeing there is tear gas there. You see a soldier throwing away that tear gas canister, tear gas being used against the military. That is startling. This is what's new about today, Jim, and this is what takes us to a new place. No way of proving those people in military uniform on the protester side are certainly Venezuelan soldiers, but there's a lot of them, and they seem to know what they're doing, Jim.
Okay, Nick, stand by. We're going to bring in Stefano Pozzebon. He is on the ground in Caracas. He joins us now by telephone. Stefano, these are remarkable images we're watching now on our air. which appear to show some members of the Venezuelan military who, as Juan Guaido is claiming, support the opposition here. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground, and is there more reporting to back up that there's now a split within the military?
Yes, exactly. What we're seeing here is a very tense situation with military men and soldiers, men in uniform, on both sides. Both with these protesters have been gathering here since the early hours of today, and inside the military airbase where the forces loyal to Nicolas Maduro are staying put. We're seeing both sides with military forces, and for a very short amount of time, a lot of shots have been fired in a moment of tension between the two sides. But just a few minutes ago, next to the place where I'm standing here in Caracas,
Stefano, just because it's difficult to hear you, and I know you're in the middle of it there, but to be clear, you said you heard shots fired. Are you sure this is gunfire? Sometimes the sound of tear gas being fired can sound like gunshots, but have you witnessed gunfire?
Fire shots being fired for just a very brief amount of time. Now the situation is in a tense calm, but for a few minutes, as the two sides were getting closer, there has been an armed confrontation for a very, very short amount of time. And now the situation has stayed calmer, and Juan Guaido himself has appeared here on the scene in Caracas, just a few hundreds of meters from the La Carrota